Meet George Lane, a powerful CEO in Phoenix who built his empire from nothing, fueled by grit, drive, and painful silence. But one dusty afternoon, that silence cracks. He sees a boy, maybe 10, hauling a bag of recyclables across a rundown alley. There's something in the boy's eyes, determination, resilience, that mirrors George's own. Haunted by the past, George follows a trail that leads him back to Kate, the woman he once loved, and to Ryan, the son he never knew. Secrets unravel fast. A mother's silence, a grandmother's betrayal, a deal paid in shame. But Ryan doesn't trust easy. To him, George is just another man with money, and Evelyn, George's mother, will do anything to keep her secrets buried. Will George sacrifice everything to claim the family he never knew he lost? Or will the truth be too late to matter? Watch as a boy's simple gift, a box of recyclables wrapped in hope and the word family, becomes the turning point in this deeply moving story. Subscribe now to witness this emotional journey of love, redemption, and the power of starting over. The Arizona sun was brutal that morning, turning the Phoenix asphalt into a shimmering mirror of heat. From behind the tinted window of a black SUV, George Lane adjusted his sunglasses and let his mind drift, only to be pulled back sharply by a sight that twisted something deep in his chest. A boy, no more than 10. Scrawny, sunburned, dragging a bulging trash bag down a narrow alley between two decaying apartment buildings. But it wasn't the boy's poverty that struck George. It was his eyes. Focused. Fierce. The kind of fire George hadn't seen since he was that age, digging through scrap metal just to buy his mother medicine. The driver hesitated. "Should I keep going, Mr. Lane?" George didn't answer right away. He kept staring. The boy had stopped at a dumpster, tugging the lid open with a grunt, sorting aluminum cans with the precision of someone who took pride in his work. And there, taped to the shopping cart he pushed, was a wrinkled sign, hand-drawn in marker. "Help me recycle. Saving for a bike." George murmured, almost to himself, "He reminds me of—" He didn't finish the sentence. His voice caught in his throat. The car rolled forward, but George's thoughts stayed behind. That face, that look of quiet defiance, that was him, 37 years ago, alone, driven, unnoticed. Later that afternoon, back in the cool, minimalist expanse of his downtown high-rise office, George tried to shake the image. He couldn't. Not even while reviewing a billion-dollar merger with Stoneheart Energy. Not even when his assistant offered him a bourbon and he waved it off, distracted. He opened his laptop and searched. Phoenix, Community Recycling Youth, nothing. He narrowed it down. Phoenix Boy Recycling Alley 8th and Monroe. Still nothing. Frustrated, he called down to Terrence, his security chief. "I need street camera footage. Private alley. Corner of 8th and Monroe. I saw a kid there today. Alone. I want to know who he is." Terrence didn't ask questions. He knew George well enough by now. The CEO's instincts rarely pointed at profit, but always toward purpose. It took less than 24 hours. Terrence knocked on George's office door the next morning. His name's Ryan, 10 years old. Lives with his mom in a low-income complex near Garfield and 12th. No father listed. He collects recyclables before and after school. George leaned back in his chair, brows furrowed. "What about the mom?" "Kate Monroe. Works nights at a diner. No police record. No bad history. Just quiet." George's breath stalled. "Kate?" he said, barely audible. Terrence nodded. "Yeah. Something wrong?" George didn't answer. His fingers curled into a fist, resting gently on his desk. Kate Monroe. The name hit him like a ghost's whisper. He hadn't seen her in over a decade. They had been inseparable once. Two kids who believed they could outrun the past. Until life got louder. Until silence settled in. He had tried to find her once, years ago, but nothing ever came back. His mother said Kate had moved on, vanished. And now, this? He turned toward the floor-to-ceiling window, where the city sprawled beneath him, unaware of the storm now breaking in his heart. That night, George didn't go home. Instead, dressed down in a hoodie and jeans, he walked the neighborhood where Kate supposedly lived. Trash bins lined the curb. Rusted bicycles leaned against cracked stucco walls. The smell of fried food drifted from a taco stand on the corner. He kept walking, eyes scanning. And then, there he was again, Ryan. Same determined stride, same oversized gloves. The boy dragged a second bag now, heavy and clinking. He didn't notice George following. Or maybe he did, and just didn't care. Ryan stopped beside a row of recycling bins near the rear of an old complex. Without hesitation, he pulled a flattened cardboard box from his sack and began sorting. George stepped closer. "Hey, kid." Ryan turned, cautious. His eyes narrowed, judging. "I saw you the other day," George said gently. "You work hard." Ryan didn't smile. "You want something?" George paused, surprised by the steel in the boy's tone. "No, I just wanted to say, I admire your hustle." Ryan squinted. "You one of those guys who gives $5 and says, 'Keep it up,' like it means something?" George's breath caught again. The kid wasn't just sharp. He was guarded, wounded. "I'm not here to throw money at you," George said quietly. I saw myself in you, that's all." Ryan turned away, grabbed another bottle. "Then maybe you should take a picture. People like you don't stick around." George stood frozen, words failing. For the first time in years, someone had cut right through his polished armor. As Ryan rolled his cart away into the shadows, George remained still. The air felt heavy, like it did before a monsoon. Something inside him shifted. He didn't know what came next. But he knew now he had to find Kate. Had to know the truth. Because if the feeling in his chest was right, if that boy was who he thought he might be, then everything he thought he'd lost wasn't gone. It had just been waiting. The alley still echoed in George's memory long after he'd returned to his car. Ryan's words. "You one of those guys who gives $5 and says, 'Keep it up'?" lingered like a bruise. It wasn't just what the boy said, it was how he said it. Wounded, skeptical, proud, like a kid who had already been disappointed too many times. George couldn't shake it. The next morning, the sun had barely risen when George stood in front of an old apartment complex tucked between a shuttered convenience store and a pawn shop. The walls were sun-bleached and cracked. A child's scooter lay tipped over near the entrance, and a few paper flyers clung stubbornly to the fence. He exhaled slowly. His hand hesitated in mid-air before he finally knocked on the door of Unit 2B. The sound of footsteps came quickly, too quickly, then silence. He knocked again, softer this time. A voice came from the other side, tired, guarded. "Who is it?" "Kate," he said quietly. "It's George." Silence. Then the door opened just a crack. Kate Monroe's eyes met his, older than he remembered, lined with exhaustion, but still unmistakably her. She didn't open the door all the way. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and defensiveness. "I saw Ryan," George replied, hands at his sides. "He reminds me of someone." Kate narrowed her eyes. "So, you found us?" George nodded slowly. "I didn't know you were here. I didn't know he existed." The door creaked open a little wider, revealing a cluttered but tidy living room behind her. A pile of schoolbooks sat on the table. A lunchbox rested beside it. The scent of fried eggs lingered in the air. "You didn't know," she repeated, voice tight. "Of course you didn't." George stepped back. guilt washing over him. "Kate, I'm not here to cause trouble. When I saw him, something in me said I had to find out who he was." She stared at him for a long time, then opened the door fully. "You better come in." Inside, the apartment was small but clean. The sofa was faded, but covered in a soft knit blanket. A small drawing of a recycling bin, scribbled in crayon and proudly taped to the fridge, caught George's eye. Kate followed his gaze. "He's got this dream," she said, softer now. "Wants to build his own recycling center someday. Says the world throws away too much." George nodded slowly, something warm stirring in his chest. "He's incredible." Kate folded her arms. "He's strong, because he had to be." George turned toward her. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Kate looked away. "Because your mother made sure you wouldn't listen." George's brows knit. "What?" Kate disappeared into the small hallway and returned with a worn manila folder. Inside were photocopies of letters, ones she had sent to George's old office address years ago. Each envelope bore her name. Each one was marked, "Return to sender." "She paid me to leave," Kate said, trembling slightly. "Said you had a new life. Said you were marrying some heiress. Said Ryan didn't fit into the picture. And if I didn't take the money and disappear, she'd ruin us both." George's face drained of color. "She..." "What?" Kate's voice broke. "I was scared, George. I was alone, and I believed her." He sat down slowly, the folder still in his lap. "She told me you'd moved overseas, that you didn't want anything to do with me." "I never left Phoenix," Kate whispered. George covered his face with his hands, the weight of lost years pressing down hard. "I missed 10 years, he said finally. 10 years I'll never get back." Kate's voice was flat. "You don't get to rewrite history just because you feel bad now." "I'm not trying to," George said quietly. "But maybe I can still be part of his future." Just then, the door opened and Ryan walked in, his backpack dragging from one shoulder, his hands stained with dirt. He stopped in his tracks when he saw George. "You again?" he said warily. Kate stood, composed. "Ryan, this is George. He's an old friend." Ryan eyed him with suspicion. "Didn't seem like just a friend yesterday." George swallowed. "I didn't come to hurt you. I came to understand." Ryan didn't answer. He walked past George, dropped his bag, and went straight to the kitchen sink. Kate nodded toward the door. "Maybe give us some time, George." He rose, still dazed. As he reached the doorway, he turned back. "Kate, thank you for letting me in." Her voice came softly. "That's all I did. The rest is up to you." George stepped out into the Phoenix sun again, a memory from years ago flickering in his mind. Kate, sitting beside him on a park bench, talking about the kind of father he'd one day be. And now, that chance had returned, but the question echoed in his mind. Would Ryan ever believe in him? The silence in George Lane's office was suffocating, the kind that made his luxury skyline view feel like a glass prison. A dozen missed calls blinked on his phone. His assistant had left notes about board meetings, market updates, and travel plans. But George stared past all of it. His mind was still back in that small, cramped apartment with the peeling paint and the smell of burnt toast lingering in the air. Back to the moment when Kate said the words that had been echoing in his head ever since. "Ryan is your son." He stood and opened the drawer of his desk. Inside was a photograph, faded now, of him and Kate at a carnival 15 years ago. She was laughing, holding a stuffed bear he'd won for her. That night had been one of the last before everything changed. And now he knew why. He picked up his phone and made a call he had never imagined placing. "Hello?" came the sharp, familiar voice. "Mother," he said, trying to keep his tone steady. "We need to talk, face to face." The Lane family estate sat behind wrought-iron gates and manicured hedges in Paradise Valley, a quiet mansion built more on reputation than warmth. George pulled up in silence and stepped into the cool marble foyer. Evelyn Lane was already waiting by the staircase, immaculate in a cream blouse, her silver hair swept back like always. She looked more like a judge awaiting trial than a mother greeting her son. "To what do I owe the surprise?" she asked, her voice clipped. "I spoke to Kate," George said calmly, "and I met Ryan." Evelyn's smile faltered, just for a second. Then she turned and walked toward the sitting room. "I see." "You told me she left the country," he said, following her. "You told me she didn't want anything to do with me." She poured herself a glass of water, unhurried. "She made her choices." "You paid her off," George said, stepping closer. "You gave her money to disappear, and you made sure I never saw the letters she sent." Evelyn didn't deny it. "You were on the cusp of a major merger. You were being considered for Forbes' youngest CEO of the year. I couldn't let some girl from the wrong side of town derail that." "She wasn't some girl," he snapped. "She was the woman I loved, and Ryan is my son." Evelyn set the glass down and looked at him, cold, composed. "And now what? You'll throw away everything for some child you didn't even know existed until a week ago?" George's voice dropped to a whisper. "He's not some child. He's my child." A silence settled between them. Then Evelyn turned, eyes icy. "Don't let guilt cloud your legacy." George met her gaze, steel rising in his voice. "Maybe it's time I made a new one." Later that night, back at his penthouse, George sat alone at the kitchen counter, staring at the recycling bin under the sink. It was empty, but his thoughts weren't. He replayed every encounter with Ryan, the way the boy looked at him with guarded eyes, the way he spoke with Kate's same quiet defiance. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Kate. She looked tired but determined. She held a small envelope in her hand. "This came in the mail years ago," she said, stepping inside. "I was going to send it to you after Ryan was born, before your mother showed up." George opened the envelope. Inside was a photo of a newborn wrapped in a blue blanket, a date scribbled in Kate's handwriting, and one word: "Yours." His throat tightened. "Why now?" he asked quietly. Kate sat across from him. "Because I think you deserve to know, and Ryan deserves the truth, even if he's not ready to hear it yet." George nodded slowly, eyes never leaving the photo. "He looks like me," he whispered. "He acts like you too," Kate added, her tone softer now. "Stubborn, relentless, but good. He's got this fire in him, George. It keeps him going. But he doesn't trust easily." George exhaled deeply. "Then I'll earn it, one day at a time." Kate rose. "You'll have to do more than show up in a suit. He doesn't care about titles or bank accounts. He wants someone who stays, someone who listens." George stood too. "Then that's what I'll be." Kate nodded once, then stepped back into the hallway. Before she left, she turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "You missed the beginning, but maybe, just maybe, you can still be part of the middle." George stood at the door long after it closed. In his hand, the photo trembled slightly. In his chest, something steadier than ambition began to grow. The photo of baby Ryan still sat on George's kitchen counter the next morning, its edges curled from years inside that envelope. George had stared at it all night, the weight of truth crashing against every decision he'd made in the past decade. But today, there were no more delays. By the time he reached Lane Global's legal floor, he wasn't in CEO mode. He was a father trying to uncover a lie. His assistant barely had time to greet him before he marched into the private records archive and requested a decade's worth of personal correspondence logs. "What are you looking for exactly, Mr. Lane?" the clerk asked cautiously. "Every communication from Kate Harrison, Postmarked between 2013 and 2014, George said, his voice clipped but steady. If they were received, I want to know who logged them, and if they weren't, I want to know who stopped them. It didn't take long. There were 6 letters, never forwarded. Each one had been intercepted by someone using Evelyn's executive clearance. At first, George couldn't breathe. He just stood there, the papers trembling in his hands as he read Kate's words. Desperate, confused, hopeful. You have a son. His name is Ryan. I thought you deserved to know. One letter was sealed with a pressed marigold, crushed flat between the folds. A keepsake Kate had once said symbolized resilience. She'd picked them from the alley behind her apartment when they were young and broke. Even concrete can't stop beauty, she used to whisper. And George had missed all of it. He clenched the stack of letters and left without a word. That evening, George stood outside Evelyn Lane's parlor, the familiar scent of bergamot tea drifting through the open door. She was arranging orchids, white ones, her favorite, when he entered. He placed the unopened letters on the table with a quiet thud. Evelyn didn't look up. I found them, George said, softly at first. You had them hidden. Still no reaction. I read every word, Mother. Evelyn finally turned. Her expression was calm, composed, almost bored. And now you know, so what? You're going to throw everything away because of a child born from poor judgment? George blinked. My child. Your grandson. You were young, impulsive. That girl was beneath you, Evelyn said, brushing a leaf from the orchid stem. I did what any mother protecting her son's future would have done. You paid her off, George said, voice rising. You offered her money to vanish. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. She accepted it, didn't she? George took a step closer. Because she had no choice. You used our power to erase my family. She spared you, Evelyn replied coolly. You're welcome. George's fists clenched. You call that mercy? You took away 10 years I'll never get back. I missed his first words, his first steps, his birthdays. And you stood there, year after year, pretending you were saving me. Evelyn's composure cracked, just slightly. You have built an empire, George. Don't destroy it chasing after ghosts. He exhaled, stepping back. I'd burn the whole thing down, he whispered, if it meant Ryan knew he was wanted. He turned and walked out without another word. The next morning, George found himself parked on a dusty curb near the same recycling route he'd seen Ryan walk. The sun hadn't fully risen, and Phoenix was quiet, still half asleep. He spotted the boy about a block away, tugging a beat-up wagon filled with cans, eyes squinting in the rising light. George stepped out of his car slowly, careful not to startle him. Ryan looked up, brow furrowed. You again? George gave a small smile. Yeah, me again. Ryan crossed his arms. What do you want now? George walked closer, stopping a respectful distance away. I wanted to talk. Not about money, not about business. Just talk. Ryan narrowed his eyes. Why? You don't even know me. You're right, George said quietly, and that's on me. But I want to, if you'll let me. The boy glanced down at his wagon, then back at George. People always want things. Then they leave. George swallowed. I left, without knowing I was leaving something behind. But I'm not walking away this time. Ryan studied him, skeptical but curious. You don't even know how to recycle right, he muttered. George laughed softly. You're probably right. Think you could teach me? Ryan shrugged, then nodded. Just once. They sat by the curb for the next hour, sorting plastics and metals into separate bags. George listened more than he spoke. He asked questions, not about grades or goals, but about Ryan's favorite things. Building robots from scrap, a stray cat he fed near the alley, a comic book series he saved quarters to buy. And, as they worked, George noticed something small but important. Ryan's hands moved like his used to, as a kid, assembling model planes in the garage. Focused, intentional, like every piece had meaning. It hit him again. This wasn't coincidence. This was blood. By the time they finished, Ryan handed George a crushed soda tab shaped like a heart. "I usually toss these," the boy mumbled, "but sometimes I keep 'em, if they look cool." George accepted it carefully, his fingers brushing Ryan's. "Thanks. I'll hold on to it." As Ryan pulled his wagon home, George stayed behind, watching him disappear into the dusty morning light. In his hand, the heart-shaped tab gleamed faintly in the sun. The heart-shaped soda tab still sat in the George's pocket, warm from the Phoenix sun, when he returned to the curb the next day. Ryan hadn't said much after their first real talk, but George could tell something shifted. A crack had opened. Narrow, cautious, but there. And George wasn't going to let it close. He showed up early, dressed down in jeans and a faded flannel, carrying 2 bags of sorted recyclables he'd pulled from the bins behind his office. No driver, no press, just a father trying to earn a second chance. Ryan rolled up a few minutes later, dragging his wagon like always. Only today, he paused when he saw George kneeling by the curb, sorting aluminum cans into separate stacks. "You're back," Ryan muttered. George looked up, shielding his eyes from the sun. "Told you I could use a good teacher." Ryan grunted, half amused, half skeptical. "You didn't mix the glass and plastic this time." "Progress," George said, grinning softly. They worked quietly for a while, the rhythm of clinking bottles and shuffling feet filling the silence. Then Ryan spoke without looking up. "You rich or something?" George smiled gently. "Yeah, I run a company. We build housing. But I didn't come here to talk about that." "Then why'd you come?" Ryan asked, sharper now. "People like you, they come to poor neighborhoods for one of 2 reasons: pity or guilt." George hesitated, then answered truthfully. "I came because I saw you and I couldn't stop thinking about you. The way you work, the way you care. You remind me of me, when I was younger." Ryan snorted. "You? Digging through trash? I used to collect scraps from construction sites, built things out of nothing, just like you." Ryan's eyes flickered, uncertain. "My mom says people don't change. They just learn how to lie better." George's breath caught. "She's right to be careful, but I'm not here to lie. I'm here to be honest, even if it's messy." The boy stopped sorting. "So, be honest." George looked directly at him. "I think I might be your father." Ryan froze. Silence, deep and heavy, stretched between them. Then Ryan stood, yanked the handle of his wagon, and muttered, "You're crazy." George followed, not pushing, just walking beside him. "I know it's a lot. I only found out a few days ago. Your mom, Kate, she didn't hide you because she wanted to. Someone in my life, someone I trusted, made sure I didn't know." Ryan kept walking, faster now. "So now what? You show up out of nowhere, throw money at us, and think we're a family?" George stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. "No, I'm not throwing anything. I'm standing here with nothing but the truth. I missed 10 years, Ryan. I can't buy those back." Ryan turned to face him. His voice shook with frustration. "Then why are you even here?" George's voice cracked as he replied, "Because I want to be." A long beat. "I don't need your money," Ryan said, almost whispering. "I know," George replied. "I need something too. A chance. To know you. To show you that you matter to me, not because of guilt, not out of charity, because you're my son." The words hung in the air. Then Ryan pulled something from the front pocket of his hoodie. A folded sketchbook. He flipped it open to a page near the back and showed George a drawing. It was of the curb they'd sat on yesterday. 2 figures side by side, cans between them, a little soda tab heart resting in the center. George swallowed hard. "You drew this?" Ryan nodded. Sometimes I draw things I want to remember, just in case they don't happen again. George knelt, tears burning behind his eyes. Can I keep it? Ryan shrugged, but his voice was softer. You already did. That night, George sat alone in his apartment with the sketch propped on the mantel. He hadn't been able to stop looking at it. Every line, every shadow. Ryan had captured him not as a CEO, but as a man kneeling on a sidewalk, trying to rebuild what he never knew he'd lost. George pulled out his phone and typed a message to Kate. I told him. I didn't use your name, but I told him the truth. I want to earn whatever comes next. He hesitated, then added, I'm not giving up. Before he could hit send, another message popped in. From Kate. Come by tomorrow. We need to talk. George leaned back, exhaling slowly. He reached into his pocket and touched the soda tab again. Still warm, still shining faintly in the lamplight. One step closer. The next morning arrived heavy with heat and questions. George stood outside the worn apartment complex again. The sketch Ryan gave him still folded neatly in his shirt pocket like a fragile keepsake. The night before had brought a flicker of hope, but hope, George knew, wasn't a finish line. It was an opening, and now he was about to walk straight into its fire. He knocked once. The door opened part way. Kate stood there, barefoot, still in a faded t-shirt, her hair pinned up like she hadn't slept. You said we needed to talk, George said gently. She stepped aside without a word. He entered slowly. The apartment was modest, small, the kind of place where furniture had been repaired instead of replaced. There was a stack of Ryan's drawings on the dining table. Houses made from soda cans, castles from milk cartons. Each one a dream built from what others threw away. Kate didn't sit. She folded her arms, her eyes sharp. He told me. George nodded. I figured. Did you tell him who you were? No, just that I might be someone important. Kate scoffed. That's one way to put it. He sat on the couch. Kate, I didn't come here to defend myself. But I need you to know, I didn't abandon you. I didn't even know you were carrying my child. She laughed bitterly. Is that supposed to make me feel better? Like I raised our son alone, but hey, at least you were ignorant instead of cruel? George flinched. I want to know something, she said, her voice tight. When you left 10 years ago, did you think about me? Even once? He looked at her, eyes raw. Every day, but your number didn't work. I sent letters. I even asked my mother to reach out. Kate's face paled. Evelyn? She said slowly. George nodded. I trusted her to help. Kate stepped back, as if the name itself struck her. She came to me, she said, after you left for that Dubai project. She showed up with cash, said you were building something too big to be distracted, said if I loved you, I'd let you go quietly, said you didn't want this life. George's breath caught. Kate? I didn't know. She turned away. I didn't take the money. Not then. But when the medical bills started piling up, when Ryan got sick with that lung infection, I was drowning. So I called her. She paid. And I signed her little paper. What paper? A non-disclosure agreement. She said if I ever told you, she'd cut off the support. And I was scared. I hated her. I hated myself. But I did it for Ryan. George felt like the floor had dropped beneath him. She paid you to disappear. Kate finally sat, her voice cracking. Don't look at me like that. I did what I had to do. He reached forward, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm not judging you. I'm angry. At her. At myself. I should have looked harder. Fought harder. Kate's jaw tightened. You should have. Silence filled the room. Then George reached into his shirt and pulled out the folded sketch. He laid it on the table between them. He gave me this, he said. Said he only draws things he doesn't want to forget. Kate looked at the drawing for a long moment. He's never had a man in his life, never asked for one, but after yesterday, he asked me if maybe he could. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. I don't know what to do with that. George leaned forward, his voice steady. You don't have to do anything yet. I just need you to believe me when I say, I'm here now, for both of you. Kate nodded slowly, then whispered, But it's not just you. George's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Kate stood, walked to the window, arms wrapped around herself. She's still in the picture. Evelyn, do you think she's going to let this go quietly? George's heart thudded. If she thinks she can bully you or Ryan again, she's mistaken. Kate turned to face him. She won't come after me. She'll come after you. She knows how to play the system. You think she won't file for emergency custody? Use your past against you? George stood. Let her try. I'll fight. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Kate, but I won't make this one. Not again. Their eyes met. Years of pain, misunderstanding, and quiet sacrifice simmered in the space between them. Finally, Kate whispered, He's at the park, near the school. He goes there to think. George stepped toward the door. Thank you for trusting me so, even a little. Kate didn't reply, but as he left, she glanced at the sketch one more time, then gently closed the door behind him. Outside, the sun was climbing, burning across the rooftops of Phoenix like a slow revelation. George walked with purpose, the weight of 10 years pressing into every step. But under that weight was something else now. Resolve. The Phoenix sky was beginning to blush with the orange of a late afternoon when George left the park bench where Ryan had shown him a slingshot he'd made from discarded bike tubing. It had been one of their first easy conversations. No tension, no wariness, just two people talking about how to launch something small as far as possible. George had smiled, genuinely. But that fragile progress cracked the moment his phone buzzed. It was Leonard, his attorney. The message was brief, just 2 lines. Your mother filed for emergency custody, alleging unfit parenting and reckless conduct. George's legs went numb. He stared at the screen, as if the words might change if he blinked hard enough, but they didn't. They stayed, like a threat, like a betrayal, and suddenly, all the air left the world. The next morning, Kate opened the door to see George on her porch, shoulders hunched, hands stuffed into his coat pockets, as if trying to hold himself together from the inside. I didn't know where else to go, he said quietly. Kate stepped back. Come in. Inside, the apartment smelled of warm coffee and something sweet. Cinnamon toast, maybe. Ryan was at school, thankfully. The boy didn't need to see the storm brewing. George sat down at the edge of the couch, not quite able to relax. I got the papers last night, he said. Emergency petition. My mother's claiming I'm unstable, irresponsible, and emotionally volatile. Kate raised an eyebrow. Emotionally volatile? She's saying I have no long-term family record, that I've built an empire but never built a home. Kate crossed her arms, leaning against the kitchen counter. That's rich, coming from the woman who paid me to disappear. George didn't flinch. She's also claiming I manipulated you into reappearing just to use Ryan as a pawn in a PR campaign. Kate stared. She's twisting this into a media move? He nodded. She's already leaked that I might be involved in a custody scandal, and she's spinning it as a distraction from the Westport merger. Kate's jaw clenched. This isn't a boardroom. This is our son. George looked at her, desperate. I need your help, Kate, not just to fight her, to prove this isn't just some headline. I'm not trying to look good. I'm trying to be good, for once. Kate moved slowly to the table and sat down. And what exactly are you asking me to do? George reached into his coat and pulled out the one photo he had. Ryan's slingshot resting in his palm. It wasn't much, but to him it had become a symbol. Tell them, he said softly, that I matter. Even if it's not romantic, Even if we're just co-parents. Tell them I'm trying." She looked at the photo, then at him. "Why should I? You had money, power, lawyers. You didn't need me then." He leaned forward, his voice raw. "But I need you now." Kate didn't speak for a long time. Then she said something that surprised them both. "She's going to use Ryan's drawings." George blinked. "What?" Kate opened a drawer and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She slid it across the table. It was one of Ryan's sketches. George and Ryan standing next to a robot made from bottles and broken fans. "Ryan mailed this to your office last year. He found your name on a recycling flyer, addressed it to the man with the same eyes. It never got a reply." George's hands trembled as he picked it up. "I never saw this." "I believe you," Kate said quietly. "But Evelyn did. She intercepted it. That's how she found out I had told Ryan who his father was." George closed his eyes. "So she's been watching all along." Kate nodded. "And now she's fighting because she knows she's losing control." Silence hung like dust in the warm room. Finally, George folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into his wallet, close to his heart. "I'm going to fight her," he said. "Not just legally, publicly. I'm going to step down from the merger negotiations. I'll make it clear this isn't about money, it's about being a father." Kate's voice was softer now. "That'll cost you billions." George smiled, weary but clear-eyed. "Ryan's worth more than that." Kate studied him for a long moment, then stood. "Then you better be ready. Evelyn doesn't lose gracefully." "I know," he said, "but for the first time, I'm not afraid of her." She gave him a small, cautious nod. "We'll start with a declaration. From me, that I support your right to be in Ryan's life." "Thank you," he whispered. "Truly." As he stood to leave, Kate walked him to the door. She opened it, letting in the golden light of late morning. "George," she said, stopping him before he stepped outside. He turned. "If you win this, if you prove to him that you're real, don't disappear again." He met her eyes. "I won't." And, with that promise, he walked down the steps, unaware that Evelyn Lane was already preparing her next move, with a high-powered legal team, a media campaign, and one final trick hidden in her safe. The leather-bound folder sat unopened on George Lane's desk as he stared out at the Phoenix skyline, blinking against the afternoon glare. One signature, that's all it would take to finalize the Westport merger. The deal he'd been chasing for 5 years. A deal that would elevate Lane Industries into global dominance. But that folder might as well have been a coffin. Because somewhere across town, his 10-year-old son was facing the terrifying possibility of being yanked into a custody battle. And George wasn't about to let that happen. Not for any amount of money. He stood, walked to the folder, and closed it, firmly. Then he reached for his phone and called his assistant. "Cancel the meeting, pull the press release, and tell the board I'm stepping away, indefinitely." There was silence on the line. "Sir?" "You heard me," George said. "Family first. For once." He hung up, heart pounding, not with regret, but with resolve. 3 days later, he stood in a family courtroom, dressed not in one of his signature designer suits, but in a simple navy blazer and slacks. No gold cufflinks, no PR handlers, just a man fighting for his child. Kate sat on one bench, arms folded tightly. Across the aisle, Evelyn Lane looked like royalty at war. Elegant in gray silk, but her eyes were sharp, cold. The judge glanced between the parties. "Mr. Lane, this emergency hearing concerns temporary custody. Your mother has filed for guardianship, citing lack of parental history, emotional instability, and questionable judgment related to a business withdrawal that affected shareholders." George rose calmly. "Your Honor, stepping away from a business transaction doesn't prove instability. It proves priorities. I chose my son over billions. That's not a failure, it's fatherhood." The judge's gaze lingered on him, unreadable. Then Evelyn's attorney stood. "Your Honor, we intend to show that Mr. Lane's recent obsession with young Ryan is performative. He has no sustained relationship, no framework for parenting, and until a month ago he didn't even know the child existed." Evelyn chimed in, cool and sharp. "I acted out of concern. George is impulsive, reckless, and unprepared." George didn't respond with anger. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. He walked gently toward the bench and placed it down, a crumpled soda can, carefully bent and folded into a flower. The judge blinked. "What is this?" George's voice softened. "Ryan made this. From trash. From something no one cared about. He said it reminded him of hope, that even things tossed away can be turned into something good." He let that sink in. "I want to be part of that hope." Kate's eyes filled, but she remained silent. The judge looked down at the can rows. "Symbolic gestures are touching, Mr. Lane, but custody requires stability." George nodded. "Then let me prove it." Later that night, George returned to the modest apartment complex where Kate and Ryan lived. He had no driver, no press, just a backpack and something to show his son. Ryan answered the door this time, cautious but curious. "I thought you were busy with your empire," the boy said flatly. George knelt, opening the backpack. Inside was a stack of paper, handwritten notes, sketches, and rough blueprints. "I walked away from the empire," George said gently. "I want to build something smaller, something stronger, with you." Ryan looked skeptical. "Why?" George pulled out a single page, a pencil sketch of a tiny recycling center right in their neighborhood. "Because this is where it starts." Ryan reached for the page, his fingers brushing George's. After a long pause, Ryan asked, "You really gave up the company?" "Not the company," George corrected. "Just a deal. One that mattered less than you." The boy studied him for a moment. Then he turned, walked to his room, and returned holding a cardboard box. He placed it in George's lap. Inside were bits and pieces of salvaged metal, bottle caps, torn plastic, and in the center a tiny paper tag that read, "Family for keeps." George's breath caught. Ryan shrugged. "I was gonna toss it, but I guess you're trying." Tears welled in George's eyes, but he didn't let them fall. He smiled instead. "I am, and I won't stop." From the hallway, Kate watched them. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were softer now. George met her gaze. "The court hasn't decided yet, but Ryan has." She nodded. "It's a start." Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting a soft amber glow over the sidewalk. George stood, carrying the box like it was made of glass. He turned back to Ryan. "Mind if I stay for dinner?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. "Only if you like grilled cheese," George smiled. "It's my favorite." As the door closed behind them, Evelyn Lane paced her marble-floored study across town, dialing a number on her secure line. "We're not finished," she whispered. "Not yet." The afternoon sun filtered through the blinds of George's temporary apartment in Phoenix, casting warm stripes across the small wooden table. Beside a cooling cup of coffee sat a cardboard box, taped shut, its corners carefully reinforced with strips of neon green duct tape. On the top, in a child's uneven handwriting, one word was written in bold marker. Family. George hadn't opened it yet. He sat in silence, elbows on the table, staring at the box like it might vanish if he blinked. The weight of the previous week pressed into his shoulders. Walking away from the Westport deal, facing down his mother in court, trying to earn a sliver of trust from a boy who looked at him with guarded eyes. But that box, it felt like something sacred. He finally peeled back the tape with slow, deliberate fingers. Inside, resting on layers of repurposed paper, were bits of Ryan's world. A tiny robot made of wire and bottle caps, a tin can flattened into the shape of a heart, a crumpled flyer for a community cleanup with Ryan's name circled in red, and tucked between them, folded neatly, was a sheet of recycled brown paper, the kind grocery stores use to wrap fresh produce. George unfolded it, scrawled in pencil, written in careful block letters. "Thanks for trying, Dad. I think I'm ready now. Ryan." His breath caught. He let the note fall back into the box and covered his face with both hands, not to hide his tears, but to let them come without shame. Later that evening, George returned to Kate's apartment with the box in hand. Ryan opened the door before George even knocked, as if he'd been waiting. "You found it," the boy said, nodding toward the box. George smiled softly. "I did." Ryan looked at his shoes, then back up. "I made all that stuff over time. Thought I'd never use it, but it kinda helped me think." "About what?" George asked gently. Ryan shrugged, his voice low. "About what family means. If it's just who you're stuck with, or who shows up when you need them." George knelt to Ryan's level. "I want to keep showing up, buddy. Every time." From the kitchen, Kate leaned against the counter, watching. Her expression was cautious but no longer closed. Ryan stepped aside and let George in. "Mom made soup. It's not fancy." "I like soup," George said, "especially the kind someone makes after a long day." They sat together, the three of them, around the small kitchen table, bowls steaming, light flickering from a low-hanging bulb overhead. There was no talk of court, no lawyers, just spoonfuls of warmth, and the occasional nervous smile passed between George and his son. Midway through the meal, Ryan slid a new paper across the table. George unfolded it. It was a drawing, a small building made of old wood and tin with a green roof and a giant recycling symbol painted on the side. Above it, the sign read, "The Lane Center for Second Chances." George looked up, startled. "You drew this?" Ryan nodded. "We could build it, not just for us, for other kids too." George stared at the sketch, then slowly reached across the table and rested his hand over Ryan's. "I would love that." Kate cleared her throat. "You'd need permits, funding, city approvals. It's not exactly a lemonade stand." George grinned. "Then it's a good thing I know a few people at City Hall." Kate's eyes softened. She didn't smile, not fully, but she didn't pull away either. Ryan stood up abruptly. "I want to show you something." He ran into the hallway and returned holding a shoebox, which he upended gently onto the floor. Trinkets, notes, and crafts tumbled out, years of projects done alone. "I saved stuff," he said, "even when I didn't know why." George reached for a photo, a faded printout of Ryan at age 5, holding a trophy made from reused cups. The edges were bent, the ink almost gone. But Ryan's smile shone through. George looked at Kate. "You raised him well." She didn't respond, but her eyes glistened. After dinner, as George prepared to leave, Ryan followed him to the door. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" "I can," George said. Ryan hesitated, then nodded toward the drawing. "We should start planning. It's going to need good insulation." George chuckled. "Noted." The boy leaned in, hugged him quickly, then darted back inside before the moment grew awkward. George stood for a moment at the threshold, heart aching in the best way, then turned to walk down the dim stairwell. The cardboard box in his hand felt lighter now, like it was filled with more than crafts. It was filled with possibility. And upstairs, behind a closed door, Kate sat on the couch holding the drawing in her lap. She stared at the words "Second Chances" for a long time. The drawing of the Lane Center still rested on George's kitchen counter, its edges soft from Ryan's handling, the recycled paper curling slightly at the corners. It had become a kind of beacon in George's life, a silent reminder that the past didn't have to chain the future. After everything they'd been through, the doubts, the distance, the courtroom maneuvers, this one drawing felt like proof that something was healing. And now, for the first time, Kate had agreed. Not to rekindle what once was between them, but to let George be a father to Ryan. That morning, George stood at Kate's front door with a clipboard under one arm and a crate of donated books balanced on the other. Ryan opened the door, grinning. "You're early." "I figured we'd get a head start," George replied. "Thought maybe we'd go scout locations for that center of yours." Kate appeared behind Ryan, a towel over her shoulder and flowers smudged on her cheek. "He's been talking about insulation all morning." Ryan beamed. "We need recycled glass, bottles for the windows. Mom said light makes people feel safe." George smiled, touched by the care in such a simple observation. "Then let's make sure there's plenty of light." They loaded into George's SUV, Ryan clutching his drawing like a blueprint. As they drove through Phoenix, they passed old warehouses and empty lots until they found one, a narrow stretch of land near the edge of the community garden where they first met. Ryan pressed his hand to the window. "There, that's it." George parked, and they got out. The space was dusty, overgrown in places, but it backed up to the garden and had a view of the skyline. George could already picture the green-painted siding, the glass bottle windows, the recycling bins out front, and kids of all ages finding a place to belong. "Do you think it's enough space?" Ryan asked cautiously. George knelt, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "It's a start, and that's all we need." Ryan gave a small nod, then turned to run the perimeter, measuring steps in giant leaps, narrating like a tiny architect. Kate watched from a short distance. George joined her, the silence between them neither strained nor easy, just honest. "He's opening up to you," she said quietly. "I didn't expect that." "I didn't expect you to give me a chance," he admitted softly. Kate sighed. "I didn't do it for you. I know." She looked at him then, really looked. "This doesn't change everything, George. I'm not stepping back into anything I left behind." "I'm not asking you to," he said. "I just want to be here for him, for real." Kate nodded slowly. "Then prove it. Not just with time and gifts, but with staying power." Before he could reply, Ryan jogged over holding a cracked piece of mirror he'd pulled from the weeds. "For the entrance," he declared proudly. "Everyone should see themselves when they walk in, like they belong here." George swallowed the lump in his throat. "That's perfect." Back at Kate's apartment while Ryan showered, George lingered in the hallway. Kate leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Why now?" she asked, voice soft but steady. "Why fight this hard now?" George took a breath. "Because I missed everything that mattered. I let ambition blind me. I let my mother dictate who I could love, who I could be. I let years pass without asking the right questions." Kate studied him. "And now you're just, what, redeemed?" "No," he said, "but I'm trying to be." She didn't speak right away. Instead, she reached into a nearby drawer and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a photo, faded, curled at the edges. George and Kate, barely out of college, standing in front of a modest apartment, grinning. Kate held a tiny plant in a terracotta pot. George's arm was around her, the kind of closeness that felt unbreakable. "I almost threw it away 100 times," she whispered. "But something told me I'd need it one day." George looked down at the photo. "I remember that day. We had $2 left and shared a grilled cheese sandwich." Kate smiled faintly. "And you still tried to impress me with your future mansion." They both laughed quietly. Ryan emerged from the bathroom, toweling his hair dry. "Hey, Dad?" George blinked. Ryan repeated it. "Dad, can we build a compost area too?" George walked over and placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "Absolutely." That word, Dad, echoed in George's heart long after he left that night. He didn't need Kate to fall in love with him again. What mattered now was her trust, and Ryan's voice calling him something more than just his name. As George drove back to his place, he glanced at the drawing Ryan had left in the back seat. A new detail had been added. 3 stick figures in front of the lane center, standing side by side. One tall, one with long hair, one holding a can. Above their heads was a single word: us. The word us, scribbled above the stick figures on Ryan's drawing, still echoed in George's mind as he stepped into the marble lobby of Lane Global the next morning. He had barely slept. His heart was still full from Ryan calling him Dad, but something inside told him it wasn't over. Not yet. And he was right. As he passed the executive floor, a tense silence hung in the air. His assistant, Marla, intercepted him with wide eyes and a whispered, "You should check your email. Right now." George ducked into his office and opened the message. Subject: Urgent. Legal motion. Filed by Evelyn Lane. His breath caught as he scanned the email. Evelyn had filed a petition, again, to gain emergency guardianship of Ryan. This time, it was paired with an accusation. George was mentally and emotionally unfit to parent due to impulsive behavior and recent erratic decisions, including stepping down from a multi-million-dollar merger. George clenched his jaw. This was her final move. The gloves were off. Before he could respond, his phone rang. Kate. "Did you see it?" she asked, her voice taut. "I did," he said quietly. "I'm on my way." 20 minutes later, they sat at Kate's dining table. Ryan was in the other room, humming to himself, folding soda tabs into a tiny sculpture. "She's using every angle she can," Kate said bitterly. "She wants to paint you as reckless, unstable." "Because I chose him over a deal," George muttered. "She thinks love makes me weak." Kate's gaze softened. "But it's what makes you human." Just then, George's phone buzzed again. A message from Marla. "Found something. You're going to want to see this." Attached was a scanned receipt, dated 11 years ago, from a private account under Evelyn Lane's name. Payment to a legal intermediary. The memo line? Confidential settlement. K. Miller. George stared at it, ice crawling up his spine. "This is it," he said slowly. "This proves she paid Kate to disappear, to keep Ryan from me." Kate looked stunned. "You still had someone digging?" "I had to. Not for revenge, for the truth." That evening, they presented the receipt to Judge Manning. George sat beside his lawyer trying to stay calm while Evelyn, across the aisle, looked smug. Until the judge read the document aloud. Her face drained of color. "I have reviewed the evidence," the judge said sternly, "and it is clear that Evelyn Lane made an unauthorized payment to Ms. Kate Miller with the intent to interfere in the relationship between Mr. George Lane and his child. This is a severe breach of ethical conduct and grounds for dismissal of the current guardianship petition." Evelyn's lawyer tried to object. "Your Honor, my client believed she was acting in the child's best interest. With deception," the judge snapped. "This court will not reward manipulation." George remained still, but his hand tightened around the keepsake Ryan had made, the tiny soda tab sculpture shaped like a circle. A symbol of unity, a reminder of what he was fighting for. As the courtroom emptied, Evelyn lingered behind. For once, she looked small, no longer the towering matriarch who'd ruled over George's life. He walked up to her slowly. "Why?" Her lips trembled. "You were going to throw it all away, your future, our family name, for her." "No," George replied, voice steady. "You threw away my future, for control." Her eyes welled. "I lost your father too young. I couldn't lose you. You didn't lose me. You pushed me away." She didn't respond, just lowered her gaze and walked out. Later that night, back at Kate's apartment, Ryan sat on the floor with his box of recycled treasures. He handed George something wrapped in newspaper. George unfolded it slowly. Inside was a paper crown, cut from a cereal box, patched with colored tabs, stickers, and even a bent bottle cap for a jewel. "You always say CEOs wear invisible crowns," Ryan said quietly. "But I thought you deserved a real one." George's voice caught. "Why?" Ryan shrugged. "Because you stayed." George pulled him into a hug, holding him close. From the doorway, Kate watched, not with sadness, but peace. She knew this version of George wasn't the man she had once feared, ambitious to a fault, controlled by a mother who never saw the value of love over legacy. This man was learning to be a father. The next morning, George stood before the Lane Global Board. Evelyn's seat was empty. He didn't gloat. He simply said, "I'm not stepping down, but I am changing how we lead. Legacy isn't just about wealth. It's about the people we protect, the lives we change." Then, without a word, he handed the gavel to a young executive, one he had mentored quietly for years. "I'll be focusing on a new project," he said, smiling. Back in the car, Ryan and Kate waited. A map to a city lot lay between them, where the future recycling center would rise. As George buckled his seatbelt, Ryan leaned forward. "So, when do we break ground?" George glanced at him, then at Kate. "Right now." The morning air in Phoenix was crisp, a rare cool breeze dancing between sun-soaked buildings. At the edge of an old empty lot once littered with broken glass and rusted cans, a crowd had gathered. Neighbors, children, volunteers, and a few curious journalists. George Lane stood at the center of it all, his hand resting gently on Ryan's shoulder. Beside them, Kate held a clipboard and wore a simple T-shirt that read "Second Chance Recycling Project." Her eyes met George's briefly, and though there was still distance, there was no longer distrust, only quiet understanding. The night before, they had signed the final partnership documents. The center would be privately funded, community-run, and focused on teaching kids the power of purpose through recycling, repair, and renewal. Just like Ryan. The symbolic shovel leaned against the garden fence nearby, its handle wrapped in colorful strips of recycled fabric, each one labeled with a child's name. Ryan had sewn them himself, using scraps from the very things he used to collect on the street. George knelt down and handed Ryan the shovel. "You ready?" he asked. Ryan nodded. "Let's plant the first one together." They dug a small hole, pressed a sapling into the ground, an Arizona cypress, and covered it with soil. Around them, the crowd clapped softly. One small tree in a city of concrete, but it was more than a tree. It was a promise. After the ceremony, George wandered into the newly constructed learning shed, a bright space with rows of workbenches and bins full of salvaged materials. On the back wall, a banner read, "Make something out of what they threw away." He felt the sting behind his eyes again. Ryan rushed in behind him, holding up a fresh project, a picture frame made from broken bike parts and soda can tabs. Inside the frame was a photo of the three of them, Kate, George, and Ryan, laughing during a trial run at the center last week. "I made it for your office," Ryan said, voice proud. "So, even when you're not here, you'll remember this is your real job now." George knelt and pulled him close. "This is the best promotion I've ever had," he whispered. Just then, a familiar voice called from the door. It was Evelyn. She stood in a modest beige suit, her posture less rigid than before, her expression unreadable. "I came to see the place," she said quietly. Kate stepped forward instinctively, but George lifted a hand gently. "It's okay," he said. "Let's hear her out." Evelyn stepped inside and looked around, her gaze lingering on the children stacking boxes, sorting paper, laughing over bins of forgotten treasures. "I never understood it," she admitted, her voice low. "How something discarded could still be Useful. Still beautiful. She looked at Ryan, then at George. "I was wrong," she said. "Not just about Kate or the boy. About everything." George didn't reply right away. Instead, he walked over to a nearby shelf, picked up a small, battered object. Ryan's first recycled sculpture, the one made from soda tabs and wire, and placed it in Evelyn's hands. "Then maybe it's time to start seeing things differently," he said softly. Evelyn looked down at it, eyes glistening. For once, she didn't argue. She just nodded and quietly slipped out the door. That evening, as golden light spilled through the workshop windows, Kate found George watering the young sapling they had planted. "Long day," she said, handing him a cup of iced tea. He took it, smiling. "But the kind that feels like you earned something." She looked out over the space. "You didn't just earn a son, George. You earned his trust. That's harder." He nodded. "I don't take it lightly." Kate hesitated, then said gently, "You don't have to do all this to prove yourself anymore." George turned toward her. "I'm not proving anything," he said. "I'm planting roots. For him. For all of them." Nearby, Ryan ran past with a group of kids chasing a cardboard robot they had built together. He paused, turned back, and waved. "Dad, come help!" George laughed and jogged toward him, leaving Kate smiling at the sight. As the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows over the recycled art displays and tool-stained benches, the new family stood hand in hand beside the sapling. It would take time to grow. It would weather storms, heat, setbacks. But it had been planted with purpose, nurtured with love, and grounded in truth. Just like them.